Oh, yuck. Man, that is said to me, she said, how did I say? I feel like if I was actively trying to induce labor and you had some stress over the weekend, I feel like you'd be pretty mad at me.
Hello.
Hello.
Wow, that's very dark.
It is.
Very dark.
And I'm here swishing tea.
Hi, everybody. Is that better? I'm going to turn this camera a little bit.
Who are you asking? Me?
I'm asking our audience.
Right
We're
in.
back with Alex. If you can hear us. Hopefully you can hear us. I think we're live. We're live. Hey, guess what?
Look at that. What?
We're on a live show right now.
We're on a live show right now, and I'm drinking tea.
And I'm told, see, Alex made the tea today. I end up making
really
the tea.
weak.
No, not normally. That's
That's
not
completely
There's like
unfair.
a couple weeks where I've made the tea.
This is like when I say to my wife, I normally make dinner.
And then those couple weeks you complained I got the wrong tea bag once. Didn't have something else. There was another week.
You were using whipping cream for milk?
This week, you made the tea and you're complaining about the tea.
It's terribly... It's these... I brought Aaron a box of tea back from the homeland, and I keep forgetting to bring it in. But there are 240 tea bags with his name on.
There's like a massive shadow on my face. So, since we would like most people to consume this particular show, the Guys Drinking Tea podcast show as a podcast, I realized I talk a lot about the visual presentation of this thing.
Yeah, and nobody cares.
And nobody cares.
Yeah, it's like...
Right now, if you're listening to this podcast, there's a shadow on my face, and you don't care.
Yeah, do you know,
Why am I talking
I've actually
about it?
occasionally, not here, I don't think, but occasionally unashamedly said that in services. I've said, I want to talk about this thing. I know you guys don't care, but I'm interested in it. It's like that. I want to nerd out on a particular area of theology or something.
They gave me the
like,
microphone, so deal with it, right?
Yeah, and so I'm gonna talk about it.
So I'm gonna bump this up again. That's a little bit on the weird.
Yeah, this is tea that some sweet old lady in England would make that isn't strong enough. That has.
So yeah, what I've decided is that the success of one's tea. There's a very small window for you that's quality tea.
Yeah.
It's like
that's why if you ask my wife, she would say she was terrified to make me tea for years. She was like, I always make it wrong for you, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I get it though.
Exacting standards for tea.
It's a thing.
Nothing else, just tea. And
well, welcome back to the This is just Alex and I. This is like where the show started, but you've been gone.
I've been gone. You just carried on.
I carried on, and I failed one of the weeks. Poor Jessica. We had this great conversation, and our system just broke, and that was super sad. So we're gonna have to get her back on the show. But anyway, yeah, we had some great guests and good conversations with Jessica, Yvonne, Ethan. But it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
It's good
the originals. And we get to talk about a new series. We get to talk about, well, I was just in England, and yes, I've been adventuring away, and it was good to be back in the homeland. And yeah, I'm sorry that tea's so weak.
It's just...
I don't know what to tell you.
if you're also listening to this podcast, we have the foo-fooiest. Is that a word?
It might be, but you can definitely get way foo-fooier than this tea.
Is there like an official term? You guys can make comments or whatever and tell us what would be the proper way of describing a very detailed, I don't know, old school tea kettle, teapot, and cup. I've got like a South Fellowship mug.
And I've got a Grosvenor English bone china saucer and cup. And
I'm going to have to graduate. Oh, man.
Yeah, see what I mean? It just...
Okay.
Too much
well, welcome. Let's talk about what we're actually going to talk about.
Yeah.
So on Sunday, you preached on the subject of walking.
Which was... We
started a series.
So we wanted to do something... A series we called Everyday Spirituality, and it's really designed to maybe pull us a little bit out of the pattern I think we get into at times. I think there's this implication, especially if you're new to church, that we say something like, come to church and join a small group and sit in the morning and read your Bible and pray, and that's how you grow. And yet there's all these different things that we might do to engage spiritual practices. Some of them are ancient, some of them are new. What was interesting to me with walking as a spiritual practice, I feel like almost as followers of Jesus, we've almost surrendered any aspect of physicality.
Oh, so true.
To our spirituality.
Which is crazy unfortunate.
And we see that, even with like, people have done things like holy yoga, and there's the reaction like, whoa, wait. Now I understand some of that reaction. I grew up pretty fundamentalist, but I'm also have this sense that your body and your physicality is definitely tied to your spirituality. The clear lines that we try and place between the two are not clear lines.
Well,
There's an overlap.
And theologically, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, I think the Christianity is probably one of the most physical faiths.
Interesting. Unpack that. Why is it the most physical faith?
The incarnation.
Yeah.
Jesus became body and blood and flesh. Like he valued it enough to step into creation.
Yes.
And participate to become like us. Like that alone is this thing that just shouts, no, this stuff's important. It's not like God's up there. I cannot touch physical things with a 10-foot pole. That's a heresy.
Yes.
Anyway. So
yes. So there is some idea of like, if you can take care of your body, your physical health, then it's going to help your spiritual journey, perhaps, in ways that we haven't wanted to acknowledge at times.
Yep.
What you eat might affect the way that you feel and all those different things. Sometimes we say I'm spiritually low, and that can be true, but sometimes we might also say, yeah, but you've been eating really badly, you haven't got any sunlight, you've gone through all of these different things, you're not sleeping well, and those things aren't completely unrelated to each other.
Yeah, and if you found a way to just have a vibrant, healthy, righteous relationship, or like Christian life, while not sleeping, not eating well and stuff, then I don't know how you're doing it, because I don't think it's a thing.
Yeah. And if you're not doing some of those things, this isn't a, you should feel guilty about that.
Yes, it is. No, I'm just joking.
In the same way that if you, if you're struggling with your prayer life, that you shouldn't feel guilty about that. If you're struggling with church, you shouldn't feel guilty about that. Guilt is not where we want to go in this faith.
Sleep helps your faith. Guilt doesn't.
Yes, absolutely. But you're right. Those different things. When I am tired, and I would say jumping back into work life quickly after a long pilgrimage is maybe the word back. I had this moment this morning where I was like, oh, I'm up, but I am not up.
Yeah. I'm walking around my house, but I am fast asleep.
Yeah. And so those things do definitely affect us. They affect how we present ourselves, how we bring ourselves.
So we're going to spend some time talking specifically about walking, but and then we're going to talk about what is it about walking specifically that's helpful, maybe a little bit of your story and your relationship with walking and how it helps your relationship with God. maybe offer some recommendations for if you can't walk or whatever. So we're going to cover some of these things, but I do like we've already started going here. I think we should linger here for a little bit longer, just talking about a little bit more about this physicality of our faith, because walking is beneficial because of that physicality in one sense, and a couple other reasons. So, you know what? My wife is very pregnant. You should probably
take this.
So I'm going to take a
this
FaceTime
could be
call.
on air.
Oh, this is my daughter. This is not my pregnant wife.
Oh.
Hey, Piper, I'm live streaming right now. Can I talk to you later? Unless mom's having a baby. All right, if mom's not having a baby, can I finish my live stream and then call you back? All right, I love you. Say hi to Piper, everyone.
Piper's famous.
You're famous on YouTube, Piper. All right, bye.
I love it.
All right, so now all you guys know she's not having a baby yet.
Yeah. So pause on that.
What were we talking about?
We were talking about the physicality of walking. The physicality of walking. So yeah, on one hand, just getting out, walking, moving has a benefit that moves into what we might call our spiritual world. I think walking is to me this intriguing thing. Just on the surface in today's world, if you can get out of the house and leave your phone at home, there is a benefit to that separation. We live in a world that's foreign to the original writers of the text. So when they talk about relationship with God, when they talk about what it is to do spiritual disciplines, the world that we experience today of constant information, constant distraction is just foreign to them.
Yeah.
And there's something about walking that requires that allows us to move away from those things, to enter into something, to put down the tablet, to put down the phone, to turn off the screen, that actually is just in itself probably really necessary.
Absolutely. And even if the device is there, occasionally you'll see someone actively walking with a device in front of their face, but like it's just way harder. To engage a device walking, other than maybe listening to something.
Yeah, and if you I don't know what this means on a metaphorical level, but if you see someone walking as a pair and someone tries to take out a phone and send a message, it usually distracts them to the point that they almost
have to stop.
Yeah, it certainly slows them down a lot.
So walking, Now there's also something about this this interchange between left brain and right brain. So the thoughts that you have while walking, the prayers that you have while walking, actually fire both because the physicality of it, there's actually neurological benefit to anchoring ideas and prayers with a physical motion that helps it sink a little bit deeper.
Now that's incredible, because I think there's been this idea within the church, and I'm going to say the church of the last 50 to 100 years, of it doesn't matter what you do with your body when you pray. Now, this was one of the fascinating things that C.S. Lewis pulls out in his Screw Tape Letters. He talks about this conviction we can have. Oh, it doesn't matter what we do when we pray, and yet, like, his response to that was, no, you're a physical being. You're a soul that operates within a physicality, and what you do with that physicality will always affect how you pray and how you engage.
Totally.
And so we've probably moved away from a way of praying that would involve specifically kneeling, specifically acting out some certain things. And if you look at lots of other faiths, they still incorporate those things. Jewish people praying in a specific way might be an example.
Yeah.
That suggests to me that, the physical thing just on a science level is still a thing that matters.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is, and it's not just physicality. I do think that there's been this drift for a lot of Christians, myself included, prior to the last several years, where I was like, I have my spiritual life and then everything else.
Yeah.
That's just a misnomer. That's
definitely.
That's just not reality.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't apply that same principle to anything else in our life. Like, oh, my athletic performance has nothing to do with my sleep or my eating. No, of course or how about this? Like I was just playing in disc golf last night with some buddies here from the church, this church meetup group. And I was talking with one of them about how my putting in the disc golf game is a really good plumb line of how my soul is doing.
Whoa.
Because if I'm concerned about the other people watching me during a putt, and when I'm playing a game in a group or like in a league or something like that, if I am thinking about, I want to be the good at disc golf guy, my identity's wrapped up in this putt, I shoot so much worse. If if I'm stressed out, or it just makes that putting game so much harder. So my emotional, psychological well-being affects my disc golf game. And we know that, like sports talk about like yips in baseball where they can't throw, or other things where like there's a whole psychology now in professional sports all around making sure that your head's in the game. We've all heard this stuff. Well, this makes super easy sense to a lot of other areas of life, but no, my spirituality, that's one thing. And then there's everything else.
A famous British golfer used to talk about he would call it the cocoon. He would go into this place where nothing on the outside affected him. That was his like control of but it required everything in him to enter into that thing. So that in itself is just fascinating. There is a connection between the two, and somewhere it seems like our way of living today has maybe enabled that sense of separation. So today we leave the house and go to work. For many generations, work was connected to the house, was connected to family. Everyone might be involved on certain levels in what somebody did. You operated a business, you operated it from your house. The idea of I get up, I commute to work is actually a fairly new idea in the history of the world. And so we've been allowed to separate a bunch of those things. I want to separate my work life from my home life. I want to separate. And the reality is we seem to be saying, well, no, you only have one life. And all of those things intertwine, whatever you do. And actually maybe separation isn't a healthy thing.
And so like a better, maybe a more full perspective of what it means to walk with Jesus, to try and live in the way of Jesus, the heart of Jesus, is to recognize it's an invitation to a holistic life that is in alignment with the way of Jesus. Body, soul, mind, spirit, all of it is being affected by that process. So now for you, I'd love to dig into this. You mentioned it in the sermon a little bit more, but tell, like, you discovered along the way, and you told a little bit of the story, but maybe you can expound upon it. You discovered that there was a powerful connection between your soul and walking. Could you maybe retell some of that story, or maybe some other, elements of that?
So I have this like vague theory: no kids like walking, like at least walking that you have to think about. So anytime you tell like a kid we're going to walk somewhere, what is it? It's a function, right? It gets you from where you are now to where you want to be for some other better purpose. So if you say to a kid, we're walking to the park, why are we walking to the park? To go to the park, to be at the park. It's a gap between what is now and what will be, and we just have to get through it. I'm going to run as quick as possible to get to the park. I remember my parents taking me to all of these beautiful places, and I remember walking around, and it really was just a function of getting to somewhere. So I think most kids don't appreciate the joy of simply the walk itself. And that in itself is some kind of spiritual metaphor, because we regularly make the end point the purpose. And we're not particularly good at recognizing, well, the journey is the purpose. It's all about the end, and then actually recognizing, no, there is something about that.
Yeah.
So for me, becoming an adult and starting to appreciate, okay, now this in itself is a wonderful thing. There's something about this that I want to take in, appreciate, and do all of those different things. And then hitting a point in my spiritual life, maybe because of some of the left brain, right brain things that you're talking about, that I would say things to God, I would speak out prayer, I would have that engagement, but there was something that just didn't seem like it was processing or functioning. Did I believe on some level that yes, those prayers were heard and that there was some kind of answer, but it didn't feel like that time was changing me. So I would bring all of these things to God and want to go away with more of a sense of, I have spoken that out, and now my faith posture has changed. It's moved.
Yeah.
It's been passed over. I've taken this thing, I've handed it to my Father that I trust, that I love. I've asked for forgiveness for this thing, and I've moved to the other side of that. I've recognized my forgivenness. I am trying to contemplate this big question, and I feel like I've now got to a place of having an answer for it. It just felt stagnant, like it wasn't happening. I was deeply frustrated with that.
Yeah. So, like, was there a moment where you, like, accidentally stumbled across, like, oh, if I move my body in the form of walking, suddenly my prayer life comes alive in a new way?
And I think what it was a recognition in a moment where I was staying in a house with my family, some of my wife's family, and I just had this sense of I need to be where other people aren't. I need to just get it away. It was a busy season. I think perhaps, I can't remember if it was Christmas, Easter, something like that. And just having this sense of I just need to be by myself in a place I can't be reached.
Wow.
I need to separate just for a bit. And community is difficult, right? So whether that's family, whether it's people you live with, whether it's a church, we all need that time to separate a little bit. So I just left. I just said, I'm going for a walk, and I went by myself. Usually my kids and I have this relationship that if I say I'm going for a walk, they're like, we want to come with you. Yesterday morning, I went for a swim early in the morning, and they said, like, can we come swimming? Like, no kids are allowed at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning. And they were like, well, we don't want you to go if we can't go. So I'm sure they said, we're going to come with you, but I had that definite sense of, not at this point that I needed to say something or pray something. I did need to be away. I did need to remove myself. And that,
so you actually started with that.
Yeah, and exactly, yeah.
The next was like...
Yeah, and all those pieces of language that if you're familiar with the New Testament at all, with the Gospels, all those fillers of Jesus got up early in the morning and separated himself from people. Jesus went away from the crowds. Jesus sent the disciples off on a boat to row in a storm while he walked along the water. Like, that separation, very evident all over Jesus' life. So I don't think I knew what I was doing particularly. I'd done silence before, I'd done separation before, I'd done, of course, solitary prayer before, but this didn't start with prayer. This just started with, you need to get away. You need a break. You need some space. And as I was walking, that was this moment where just, a thing that's happened to me a few times in my life, actually, just this sense of Jesus coming alongside me. Now I'm sure he always is. On some level, I think one of the beautiful things that walking enables us to do is to tap into prayer in a truer sense. So I think about some of the language we use in church. We say things like, God is in heaven and all is right in the world. What does that tell us instinctively when we pray? God is up there. Your prayers have to get through a lot of space, and eventually he might hear them way up there, but then he has to get through a lot of space to interact in any way down here. Or we say something like, you've got to invite Jesus into your heart. And so then suddenly God is very small and somewhere in there, and your prayers are kind of directed in there.
And in there almost feels just as distant.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely, yeah.
I almost feel distant from myself. Yeah, so
what is that? A better posture is probably Jesus sat alongside you or walking alongside you in conversation. So I think I automatically, just accidentally, put myself into a better place for conversation. And there was this moment of walking and being in conversation, but being in conversation with someone who was just a few steps behind. Like, I was almost turning over my shoulder, and I was directing, I was leading. And to me, it became this metaphor of just in a time of life where I was having to make some decisions, having to process some things, starting to question, I believe I'm in relationship with Jesus. Is this how it's supposed to work? Who leads in this thing? Who directs? Who drives? And who do I want to drive? Who do I want to direct? Who do I want to lead?
Yeah.
And so it was this almost invite of Jesus, I'd like to walk alongside you with you as my guide in this season and always. And so it just became something that became a practice.
Gosh, I mean, I have a very similar experience. So, yeah, there's the middle. Yeah. I have a very similar experience and relationship with walking too. And I just discovered it, maybe 4 years ago. It was just like a season of intense leadership stress and all these other things. And I was sort of in this moment of crisis and I didn't know what to do. I almost left the building because I was like, I just can't be here. Yeah, similar sort of thing. Yeah. And then I just hit the Highline Canal out here and I'm just like walking and it was like suddenly this conversation started to develop. Yeah, super fascinating. So actually maybe that's just a point for some of you who are listening. If you struggle praying, have you ever tried praying walking? It maybe you're just not built for the sitting still praying all the time. And maybe there's something about this physicality that will awaken a new perspective on prayer. I was just, a while back, we were talking to Peter Pearson, who's one of our prayer warriors here. He's one of the elders, and he actually leads a prayer ministry for a mission agency, and he walks in his basement. Mm-hmm. He almost never prays super still. He's like constantly walking in his basement. And when we went over there for dinner and he showed me his little route, it's a little tiny basement and he has to like weave through some stuff through these
like
hallways.
A path like just pressed into the ground.
Exactly. He's like worn a little bit of a path into this ground because he has to walk in order to keep his soul and his mind on target with his relationship.
But this is an interesting thing about prayer and its individualness and how it's okay to say I need my way of praying to work for me. There's a really fun story about I think it was a guy called George Jeffreys. I might be wrong, but he was a famous preacher in England, like one of these charismatic revivalist preachers, but someone who just took prayer very seriously. And there's this story about two pastors coming and saying, we'd like to pray with you. And he looked at them and said, you can't handle it. And they were like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, we can do it, but you can't handle it. And apparently the story with this guy is that he used to pray sat, not walking, but sat at his desk with his forehead on the desk. And the story was on this giant oak desk, there was a groove where his forehead had literally worn a hole into the desk because of the hours he'd spent there just praying. And the story with these two guys is that after a half an hour of praying with him, they kind of crawled out of the room just because the presence of God was so significant in that place. They said, we can't deal with this.
Wow. Kind of like, woe is me, I'm undone.
Yeah, and I love to hear from Peter, like this, like he's got this pathway that is grooved. And so I picture that with the trail that I walk, which is generally the same trail of just almost like, I now start to have places on the trail, which is just outside my house. I just walk in the green space.
Yeah.
Where I remember God speaking things to me in specific places.
Interesting.
And what's funny to me is there's been a couple of times where there'll be a moment where I'm unconsciously starting to approach this place, and God will speak to me about the same thing, and I'll suddenly notice where I am, and I'll be like, oh wait, you were talking to me about this yesterday in this place. Is that like a confirmation? Is that all of these different things? But just attaching some of that physicality to it, that well-worn path, that well-worn journey.
And maybe this whole subject is a little bit of an invitation that your spirituality, like your body, your soul, all these different elements, like use everything that God has given you to shepherd your soul in a specific direction, like walking. Even like having these specific places for you, you've discovered this works. Like spiritual formation is, maybe this is a shock to you, but it's to the listeners, it's not as formulaic as we would like. It's not like I go through class 101, then class 102, class 103. Some of it is a little bit of, that's why it's called practicing. You try it out. You practice this, you practice that. And then you discover, hey, my soul really comes awake with this practice. So use it. Like,
and I think that's one of those things, like one of the things we don't always give people enough freedom for in church is to say that there is the core practice, which are ancient and locked into almost how the Bible describes the interactions with God. There's fasting, there is prayer, there is reading and meditating on scripture, all those different things. But it feels like within those things, there's infinite freedom to figure out who you are and how you interact well with them. So anyone who's spent any time around me knows a few things. I have fairly endless energy. I don't do well sitting still.
Yeah.
I have a certain, whether it's ADD or a certain, like,
Gotta keep moving.
Let's keep this thing going. So when I first moved over here from a Pentecostal church that prayed like me to a Presbyterian church and started praying with people that just sat around a table taking it in turns to pray, I had moments of like, you guys are going to drive me nuts. Like, I can't sit.
Or almost like, this isn't even prayer.
Yeah. What are you doing? This isn't like, who are you engaging with? You're just listening to each other. So to me, that was difficult. And even now that some of the elders will joke about whenever we pray, I'm always walking around. I can't sit at the table and just say stuff. I have to have some movement. So there's ways I have to say, how does my general way of praying fit into who God has made me to be? I need to move. I struggle with focus. I'm very extroverted. Walking helps me deal with some of my stuff and enables me to engage with God. And then there's other times, rarer, where I say, God, I am choosing to put aside preferences to pray in a specific way with other people, or because you're asking me to stretch myself. And so there'll be times where I've been in my office just laying on the floor, just weeping or just silently, and there's something different going on there.
Yeah.
But my general pattern of prayer is, how does this work for me? And walking is just one of those things that has unlocked the spiritual discipline of prayer for me.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago we did in service sort of a breath prayer. And I guess the point is, like, some of this is figuring out, all right, Jesus, I want to encounter you. And I want to keep exploring different ways of encountering you. Maybe it's nature that awakens it. For some people, it's study that awakens. That's one for me. Like, when I study the scriptures or I study ideas and I discover a new nugget, it's almost like when you're describing your walking experience with God, like Jesus right behind you, I have the same thing when I'm like at a desk studying. I think of him as like reading over my shoulder.
I love that.
And then every once in a while, he kind of reaches his arm over my shoulder, like, hey, check this out. That moment is like this. I get goosebumps every once in a while when I'm studying, and I'm like, you came up with that too?
I love that.
Oh my
gosh. Because you and Ethan, our youth pastor, are pretty similar in that respect. You both talk about that, and I've never experienced that. That is so fun. Like, when I study, being somewhat not to say you guys aren't intellectual, but that being how I grew up, that feels like very much me. And it almost feels like in those moments I'm not relying on God. And again, all sorts of baggage there, all sorts of misunderstandings, but I love that you've experienced that, and it makes me want to experience it too.
Yeah, like it started in Bible college, where it's just like I was just reading, and I sort of pictured him reading over my shoulder and saying, hey, go read that sentence again. There was good stuff there, or whatever. And
whereas I always, when I'm reading, and picture him saying, hey, pay attention to me, I'm over here.
Yeah.
Stop reading that stupid old book.
Yeah. So there's this quote I wanted to read from a book by Dallas Willard called Hearing God. And it sounded very similar to some of the way you've used walking in your prayer life. It's super practical. I love this. Personally, I find it works best if after I ask God to speak to me in this way, I devote the next hour or so to some kind of activity that neither engrosses my attention with other things, nor allows me to intensely focus on the matter at question. Housework, gardening, driving about on errands, or paying bills will genuinely do. I have learned not to worry about whether or not this is going to work. I know that it does not have to work, but I'm sure that it will work if God is something really he wants me to know. This is ultimately, so the point is, he goes on to explain in a little bit more detail. He like asks God a question, and in your case, you might ask a question and then you walk for a while.
Yeah.
And then he's learned that, he goes on later on, he says, generally speaking, after about an hour of doing some sort of activity that doesn't demand too much of my brain, he answers me. And if not, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Then he's chosen to say, wait. But that's some of what this walking is. It's like asking a question or say, God, is there something you want me to know? And then you walk for a while and you listen, and then it's super interesting.
And I think this is a big challenge for us. Maybe it's a Western thing, maybe it's an American thing, maybe sometimes it's a male thing. I could pull loads of, like, the Venn diagram of this would be interesting in my head. I think sometimes we ask God something, whether it's for something or a question about something. And if we're honest, it's easier to spend our time fixing it or solving it than it is listening for an answer.
Yeah.
So I might have a
Guilty.
moment, and I notice, again, speaking a lot in front of people, talking a lot about Jesus, about this message of his, about living in his way with his heart. I notice that works best when a couple of things happen. One is usually space to prep, but a big one is when I have a conversation with Jesus that looks like, what do you have for our people today? Or this week? Like, what is it that you would love to share? And when I pray that, the biggest temptation I face is to just say, okay, now I'm going to work really hard to get something down on paper. The hardest thing to do is to say, I've got a limited time, but I'm going to leave this space to say, God, you might have something to say about that. That is difficult for me because my fix-it brain says, I'm going to get some stuff down. I'm going to create, I'm going to do, I'm going to work. And learning to say no to that is very difficult.
Yeah. Jamie Winship, who was here and spoke a little while back, one of the questions he challenges you to pray when you're trying to hear God's voice is these two questions, which is a little bit different than I've been trying it out a little bit. It's interesting. He says, ask God, what do you want me to know? And what do you want me to do? I tend to say, God, why is this happening? Or God, can you please do this? Like, basically, I've already decided what you should do. I want you to do it this way.
You to act.
And he suggests this more open-ended, which is actually very similar to the way that you posed it. What do you posted in the context of prepping a sermon. What do you want for this community this week? It's saying, it's open-ended.
Yeah.
That's a super different kind of a prayer than, God, what does this particular passage that I've already decided to preach on say? That's like it's almost more already comes with an agenda.
It definitely does. And I think, interestingly, what we might find a lot is that we think we know what God needs to speak to us about, perhaps what he needs to do. I would just be interested as to how many of our questions would dissolve if in our prayer time we were able to hear God say, you are my beloved child in whom I am well pleased. I just finished reading Henry Nouwen. It's not Henry Nouwen's book. It's a book about Henry Nouwen, this famous Catholic priest who left Harvard as an academic, went to a community called L'Arche, and went there to work with disabled people. And a lot of identity questions for him. And one of the lesser known things about him is at some point he almost ran away with the circus. He fell in love with this trapeze group that he'd watched, and he just spent a lot of time with them, traveled with them, spoke with them. And all that time, 61 years old, professor at Harvard, well-known writer, very successful, still in his honest moments wrestling with longing to hear God say what he says about Jesus, his son, during his baptism. You are my beloved child in whom I am well pleased. I actually think so many of the questions we have, so many of the things that we feel like we need, they kind of disappear if we can just put ourselves in a place of hearing that. So
Totally.
that for me has been a repeated practice when I have a bunch of stuff on my mind. I want to know, God, what's happening with South, what's happening with my family, what's happening with my marriage, what's happening with all of these different things. I want info, I want action, I want answers. Is to say, Jesus, I really need in this space for you to speak to me about me.
What do you think about me?
Yeah, remind me that I am your beloved child, in whom you are well pleased. And as part of that, I've just been listening to this song, I Am Your Beloved, by I think a group associated with Bethel. And one of the lines in it is that the one who knows me best is the one who loves me most. And that's a fascinating thing, right? That
just linger on that lyric for just a moment, because I think most of our assumption is if someone knows me fully, there's no way they could love me.
Yeah, I generally feel that the better people get to know me, the more unlovable I am.
Totally.
And because I know me better than anyone else on earth, I'm like, I know the mess.
That line is the gospel.
Yeah, totally.
It's the fact that he made a way to fully know and yet fully love. Gosh, that is like that's like the goodness for the soul that everyone needs.
Yeah.
So good.
And so I think there's definitely a beauty to when you walk and pray, or however you find a way to make prayer work for you, and it has to work for you. God made you, and interacts with you as you. However you do that, there's definitely space to say, there's a bunch of stuff on my mind. A lot of it would disappear if I could get that identity thing down.
Wow. So, yeah, any final thoughts? So walking, any recommendations for people out there who are like, all right, I want to experiment with this?
I would say find a place that you love. Find a place that perhaps means something to you. We're going to talk this week a little bit about pilgrimage, about thin spaces. And I'm sure we'll have a fascinating conversation if you're around next week, which seems unlikely. But I still have questions about whether thin spaces even exist. And if you're unfamiliar with those, it's this idea that there's places where God is closer. And one of the counterpoints to that I've been asking myself is, do I believe there's places that evil exists? Is Auschwitz, where all this evil has happened, does it have some kind of aura
spiritual
of evil? Is there a spiritual darkness there? And is that how the world works?
Yeah, there's just like, God's omnipresent, so that shouldn't be.
Yes.
It's a challenging.
Yeah.
You're going to solve all that next week? I love it.
We're going to skip over lots of things. But what I do believe is that we can create our own thin spaces. There's places I still have back home in England, here now, where I can go and I'm like, God, you have met with me here before, with me here before. And it's suddenly so much easier to believe he'll do it again.
You know what? There's, we'll talk about this later in the series too. Songs are that way.
Yeah, definitely.
They're Ebenezers.
Yeah.
Like in the scriptures, this idea of an Ebenezer is like this pile of rocks that they would set up as a memorial to, one, remind them of a significant moment that God moved in the community and it would remind them to tell others about that thing. And certain songs, as soon as you hear the first few phrases, maybe it's an old hymn or a song that like God met you during hearing that song. As soon as you hear that, you're like instantly ushered to the presence of God. Is that song more spiritual? Because for someone else, they may hate the song.
Yeah.
And maybe the same things could be
the songs that we've sung on Sunday, where I'll say to you, like, I hate that song personally, but we should definitely sing it because I know for so many people it's a profound experience.
Interesting.
And so what we'll wrestle with a little bit, again, somewhat of a spoiler alert,
week?
a little bit of a spoiler alert, is this idea of pilgrimage as the church has known it through a chunk of its history. And comparing that to walking, I would say, as we're encouraging you to walk, we're talking about walking as a contemplation, whereas pilgrimage is a suffering. And most writers around experiencing God have suggested that you either experience God through contemplation or through suffering. That there is something about walking that provides space to contemplate, provides space to interact with God. And so a little practical thing is, if you want to try walking and you think it's something you might do regularly, finding a place that's reachable, that's accessible, that you can go to often, that you can almost do that George Jeffreys thing of wearing a hole in the desk, or the Peter Person thing of building a track around your basement that enables you to say, yeah, I've been here before. And you've spoken to me here before. You've met with me here before. I have this muscle memory here. And that when I arrive here and begin walking, there's almost a way that I'm like, no, I'm ready for this. I'm ready to engage with you. And I know it's going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. And that in and of itself, that's like great spiritual advice. It's also just leveraging how your brain works, your body works, like just these habit forming things that just undergird and support your spiritual journey.
So I walk a lot, as I say, in the green space in Highlands Ranch. There are places I would rather walk in some ways. Like I love up by Lair of the Bear. I love some of the places, like even just Genesee, somewhere fairly close and accessible. But I realized those are 20-minute drives, 25-minute drives. What is actually best for me is a place I can reach in about 30 seconds or a minute. And so I suddenly look at my watch and I'm like, okay, I got an hour. I can start walking and I can be back in an hour. And that's super beneficial. So while beauty is wonderful, while the sense of what it looks like is great, the accessibility is a big deal.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, actually, Bill Wiseman was telling me like he grieves when summer comes because he likes walking in the dead of winter, especially when there's snow on the ground because it's so much more quiet.
Yes.
Anyway, it's just like all these little things. It's fun to explore all this stuff. Well, any other final thoughts for people?
I think that was it. I think that get out and walk and find a way to make prayer work for who God made you, because he longs to have conversations with you.
I love it. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Do the like, subscribe thing. We would love to, if you haven't listened to us on the podcast platforms, that's probably a better place than the YouTube necessarily.
And rate the podcast.
Yes.
Only if you're going to rate it well.
Well, it might be healthy feedback for us. If you'd like to tell us that we ramble too much about tea.
Don't click the rating number.
But we don't have hardly any ratings on the podcast platforms yet. So it would be beneficial if you subscribed over there and rated us so that it gets out there, because that's probably a better environment for this content anyway. Mm-hmm. But we started on YouTube, so people.
So we love you. We've got this soft spot for YouTube.
Yeah, you YouTube people are so awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. See